Simone Carter was 34 years old when her fiancé pulled her aside at their own engagement party and told her, in front of 150 guests, that she needed to leave. Preston didn't whisper it. He didn't wait for privacy. He said it, standing under the string lights his mother had paid for, holding a microphone meant for a toast, while a 26-year-old project coordinator named Bree watched from the bar with his investors, like she already belonged there. He thought he was being discreet. He thought embarrassment was the worst thing that could happen tonight. What Preston didn't know was that his mother's whispered warning about not embarrassing this family had come 3 minutes too late. Simone had already heard the words, the two families finally moving forward, from a man who wasn't supposed to be talking about her fiancé's future without her in it. Simone reached up and removed her own ring. She set it on the gift table. And in that moment, in front of everyone he cared about impressing, she made a decision that would end far more than a wedding. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The string lights were Simone's idea. She had found them 3 weekends ago at a warehouse sale, 300 feet of warm amber bulbs for $60, and spent a Saturday afternoon untangling them on the floor of her apartment while Preston was out golfing. Now they hung in long, graceful loops across the ceiling of the Hargrove room, and they made everything underneath them look golden, even the parts that weren't. The Wade family's country club smelled the way it always did: old wood, fresh flowers, money that didn't need to announce itself. Servers in white jackets moved through the crowd like water finding its path, carrying trays of champagne and small plates of food Simone couldn't name but had approved the pricing for. 150 guests filled the room with noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the low murmur of people performing their best versions of themselves. Simone stood near the entrance to the terrace and smoothed the front of her dress with one hand. It was a good dress, ivory silk crepe, structured at the shoulders, fitted through the waist. She had bought it off the rack for $90 and spent 2 evenings at her kitchen table, shortening the hem and taking in the sides herself. Nobody in this room could tell. That was the point. Her phone buzzed against her palm. She glanced at the screen. Marcus Chen, Harwick Audit. She answered it. Marcus. She kept her voice low and even, stepping half a step closer to the terrace door. Tell me. The variance on the Harwick account just jumped to $42,000. It wasn't there in Tuesday's pull. Someone moved it. Which line item? Consulting fees. 3rd quarter. Simone's eyes swept the room out of habit while her brain shifted gears completely. She cataloged what Marcus was telling her the same way she cataloged everything. Quietly, precisely, without wasting a single motion. Pull the vendor contracts from Q2 and flag anything without a matching invoice, she said. Don't close the file. I'll look at it tomorrow morning. You sure? It's your engagement party. I'm sure. Good catch, Marcus. She ended the call and put her phone back in her small beaded clutch. The whole thing had taken 90 seconds. She was already moving. Across the room, near the entrance to the kitchen corridor, one of the catering servers was standing with his arms at his sides and a look on his face like a man waiting for bad news. Simone recognized him, the lead from the company Preston had booked for the evening. She had confirmed with them last week. Preston had told her he would reconfirm the day before. She already knew he hadn't. She crossed the room, touched the server's elbow lightly, and said, "The warm appetizers haven't come out yet. Is there an issue with the kitchen timing?" The server exhaled. "We didn't have a final guest count confirmed, ma'am. We held back on the second round until—" 150, Simone said. "Same as the contract. You're fine to release the second round." She gave him a small, steady nod. "Thank you." He nodded back and disappeared through the corridor door. "She's very capable, isn't she?" The voice came from just behind Simone's left shoulder. Dolores Wade, speaking in the particular tone she used when she was complimenting someone and insulting them at the same time. She was talking to Marjorie Ashfield, the wife of one of Preston's golf friends, who was nodding with a polite, unreadable smile. "Surprising, really," Dolores continued, not lowering her voice, "that Preston chose someone so practical. But I suppose every family needs one." Simone did not turn around. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, took a slow sip, and moved on. Practical. She tucked the word somewhere small and quiet inside herself, next to all the others she had collected over the past 2 years. They made quite a pile by now. She found Preston near the center of the room, or rather, she found where Preston was supposed to be. He was there, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit immaculate, but he wasn't quite present. His glass was nearly empty, and it hadn't been long since the last time she'd seen him with a full one. He laughed at something a man beside him said, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were somewhere else entirely. She followed his gaze. The bar ran along the far wall beneath a row of framed black and white photographs, and there, at the curve of it, stood Bree Sinclair, 26 years old, Preston's project coordinator on the Meridian condo development. Bree was wearing a green dress that fit like it had been made for her, and maybe it had been. And she was talking to 3 of Preston's investors with her whole body relaxed and open, one hand resting lightly on the bar, her laugh easy and unforced. She looked like she had grown up in rooms exactly like this one. She probably had. Simone watched Preston watch her. Then she watched him look away when Bree's father, a broad man named Gerald Sinclair with silver at his temples, stepped close to Bree and said something that made Bree smile. Gerald clapped a hand on Bree's shoulder with the comfortable ease of a man who owned things. Preston set his empty glass down on a nearby table. Dolores appeared at his side almost immediately, her hand closing around his forearm with a grip that looked gentle, but wasn't. She leaned in close to his ear. Beside her, appearing from just beyond the edge of the crowd, was Gerald Sinclair. His expression was not the expression of a man at a party. The 3 of them moved together toward the far end of the bar. Simone did not follow. She stood where she was, her glass of sparkling water cool in her hand, and she watched Preston's face from across the room. She watched it go from confident to careful to something that looked a lot like rattled. Preston came back from the bar end of the room like a man walking through water. His shoulders were set too square, his jaw was tight. He grabbed a full glass of champagne from a passing tray and drank half of it before he reached the center of the room, then smiled at someone who called his name, a big, open smile that showed all his teeth, and finished the rest. A server appeared at his elbow. Preston swapped the empty glass for a full one without looking down. Simone watched him cross toward her and felt a small, cold thing settle in her stomach. She had seen Preston nervous before big investor calls, before site walkthroughs that hadn't gone well. He got loud when he was nervous. He worked the room harder, talked faster, laughed at things that weren't funny. What she was seeing now was different. He wasn't loud. He was contained in a way that looked like it cost him something. He reached her side and touched the small of her back briefly, a greeting that looked like warmth and felt like nothing. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Fine." He took another sip. "Everything's fine." He didn't look at her. Across the room, Bree was still at the bar. Gerald Sinclair had moved away, but Bree stayed where she was, one finger tracing the rim of her glass. She wasn't watching Preston. She was looking at the middle distance with an expression that was perfectly, carefully neutral. The music dropped lower, then lower still. The DJ's voice came over the speakers, warm and practiced. "If I could get everyone's attention, it looks like we're just about ready for the toast." A ripple of movement went through the crowd. Guests turned, shifted, gathered. The servers paused. Someone near the terrace door shushed their neighbor. 150 people rearranged themselves into an audience, their faces open and expectant, champagne glasses already lifting. Simone smoothed the front of her dress once and moved to Preston's side. The DJ held out a wireless microphone. Preston took it and turned to face the room. He was good at this, had always been good at it. He had the kind of face people liked to look at, and he knew how to use silence before speaking, how to make a room lean toward him. He let the moment breathe. The crowd smiled. Simone stood beside him. She held her glass at the right height. She smiled at no one in particular, the practice smile she had learned to wear in rooms like this one. Warm without being eager, present without being loud. but she could feel it, something running under his skin. His right hand, the one not holding the microphone, was at his side, and his fingers pressed flat against his thigh, once, twice, the way they did when he was working through something he hadn't solved yet. He didn't turn his head toward her, not even a glance. "Thank you all for being here," Preston began. His voice was steady, strong even. "Simone and I, this has been a long time coming." Light laughter from the crowd. Someone near the back called out, "About time!" and got more laughter. Preston smiled. He took a short breath. "I just want to say—" He stopped. His eyes moved across the crowd, snagging on something in the back half of the room. Simone didn't look to see what. "I want to say that tonight represents—" He stopped again. The room was quiet, the way rooms get when they sense something shifting. Not uncomfortable yet, just attentive, waiting. Simone kept her smile exactly where it was. "Come on," she thought, not unkindly. "Just say it. Just get through it." Preston looked down at the floor for 1 second. Then he looked up, and he turned, finally, and looked at Simone. There was something in his face she didn't recognize. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It wasn't cruelty. It was something more confused than either of those. The look of a man who had talked himself into something and was discovering, too late, that the words had already left his mouth before he caught them. "Simone," his voice was lower now, still into the microphone. "I think it might be better if I need you to step outside for a moment." She blinked. "You're not really helping right now," he said. "It would be better if you left." He said it the way people say things they believe are quiet. He was not quiet. Every word landed clean and clear in a room that had gone absolutely still, carried by the microphone to every corner, to every one of the 150 people holding their champagne glasses and staring. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Simone had ever heard. She felt the heat climb the back of her neck. She felt every eye in the room find her face and stay there. She did not let her expression change. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest table. The small, clean sound of glass on linen was the only sound in the room. She turned toward the exit. Behind her, the murmurs began. Slow at first, then faster, rolling through the crowd like a wave gathering weight. Simone walked. She was almost to the door when she heard it. Gerald Sinclair's voice, low and satisfied, the way men sound when something they've been waiting on finally arrives. "Congratulations, Preston. Genuinely. It's good to see the two families finally being able to move forward." Simone stopped walking, not because she meant to. Her feet just stopped, the way a body does when the mind receives something it needs a moment to process. The noise of the room, the murmurs, the shifting, seemed to pull back, and those words sat there in the sudden quiet of her own skull. The two families finally being able to move forward. Not congratulations on your engagement, not "you're a lucky man," not any of the things a guest says to a man at his own engagement party about the woman he is supposed to be building a life with. The two families. She turned her head just slightly, enough to see them. Gerald Sinclair had his hand on Preston's arm, leaning in with the easy confidence of a man confirming a deal that has already been signed. Preston was nodding, a short, tight nod. His jaw was working. He reached up and touched the back of his neck once, a small, private tell she had spent 2 years learning to read, the thing he did when he was relieved. Not rattled, relieved. Bree stood a few feet away, still at the bar, still studying the middle distance, but the corner of her mouth had shifted, just barely, the smallest possible version of a smile. Simone stood in the middle of the room and understood all of it in a single, cold moment. Not the details. She didn't have the details yet. But the shape of it, the arrangement, the planning, the months of something happening in rooms she wasn't in. The shape of it was suddenly very, very clear. She had been walking toward the exit. She had been about to leave, the way he'd told her to, because some part of her had still been trying to protect him from the size of his own mistake. She stopped doing that. Simone turned around. The room was still watching her. Of course it was. Every one of the 150 guests who had witnessed what Preston said into that microphone had their eyes on her back, and now they were watching her face as she turned, and she could see them recalibrate. The confusion, the anticipation, the held breath. She walked back toward the center of the room, slowly, with her shoulders straight, past the row of bistro tables, past a cluster of Preston's colleagues who parted slightly without meaning to, past the gift table stacked with wrapped boxes and ivory envelopes, with the neat gold tablecloth and the small floral arrangement someone had spent real money on. She stopped at the table. She reached down and took hold of her left hand with her right, and she slid the ring off. The diamond solitaire, the one Preston had proposed with at a restaurant she'd had to look up beforehand because she couldn't afford to eat there on her own. She held it for one moment, feeling the weight of it, small and cool in her palm. Then she set it down on the table, between a silver-wrapped box and a card with a pale blue envelope, and she let it go. She raised her eyes to the room. "The wedding is cancelled," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was so quiet, the words reached every corner without effort. "Effective immediately." That was all. She turned and walked toward the exit again. The gasps started before she reached the door. One, then several, then something that rolled through the crowd like the room was exhaling. Someone said Preston's name. She didn't hear what followed. She pushed through the door and the night air hit her, cool and sharp. And then she was on the steps. And then she was crossing the parking lot, the gravel steady under her heels, the sound of the party a muffled blur behind her. She found her car. She unlocked it and sat down and closed the door. Then her hands started shaking. Not crying, not falling apart, just the body doing what it does when the adrenaline finds nowhere left to go. Her fingers trembling against the steering wheel, her breath coming too fast for a few seconds before she steadied it. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. Once. Again. She picked up her phone. Julian answered texts at any hour. He always had. She typed without thinking about what she was asking him to do or what it might mean, because she already knew what it meant. Because she had spent 8 years as a forensic accountant, and she understood with absolute clarity what a man under financial pressure looked like when someone else's money was within reach. "I need you to pull every permit and filing on Wade Development. Tonight." She hit send. She watched the message deliver. Then she started the engine, backed out of the space, and drove toward the exit of the Wade family's country club, past the valet stand and the stone pillars and the iron gate that had never quite felt like it was meant to open for her. She didn't look back. The coffee had gone cold. Simone knew because she'd poured it 40 minutes ago and hadn't touched it. It sat there on the kitchen table in her favorite mug, a thin film forming at the surface, while she stared at nothing in particular, and Yolanda sat across from her doing the thing Yolanda did best, being present without forcing anything. The morning light came through the window above the sink in long, flat strips. Ordinary light, the kind that had no idea what kind of night had come before it. "You don't have to talk about it yet," Yolanda said. She had both hands wrapped around her own mug. Her voice was quiet, which for Yolanda was a form of love. "I know." "But I need you to know," Yolanda said, "that what he did last night was not about you. That was a man drowning, grabbing the nearest person to push under." Simone looked at the table. I know that too. Do you? Because you've got that look. What look? The one where you're trying to figure out what you missed, what you should have caught sooner. Yolanda tilted her head. You didn't miss anything, Simone. He hid it. Simone didn't answer, not because Yolanda was wrong, but because she wasn't entirely right either. There had been signs, small ones, the way Preston had flinched last spring when she'd asked about the project timeline, the way he'd redirected the conversation whenever she offered to look at his financing documents. She had noticed. She had chosen to read those things as stress instead of what they actually were. That was the part she was sitting with. The knock at the front door came just after 9. Julian Marsh walked in the way he always did when something was serious. No greeting, laptop already open in one arm, a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks away in his other hand because he was, underneath all the legal strategy, a person who remembered that people needed to eat. He set the bag on the counter. He sat down at the table. He turned the laptop so both of them could see it. Tell me you slept, Yolanda said. Some. He looked at Simone. How are you doing? I'm fine, she said. Julian looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he let it go. He knew her well enough to know that fine was not a feeling. It was a posture she wore when she needed her hands steady. He wasn't going to pull it off her. Okay, he said. Here's what I found. He had been pulling public records since midnight. Permits, tax filings, county records, LLC registrations. The kinds of documents that sat in plain sight in public databases and said everything if you knew how to read them. Julian knew how to read them. So did Simone. Wade Development's condo project, the Harlow build on the east side, has 3 construction liens filed against it in the last 4 months. He turned the screen slightly. 2 subcontractors, 1 materials supplier. None of them paid out. Simone leaned forward. The original capital raise was structured around 4 investors, Julian continued. Gerald Sinclair's fund is the largest, but there was a secondary raise 6 months ago. Smaller, quieter. The timeline lines up with when the first payment default started. He pulled up another document. And here, he tapped the screen. It was a collateral disclosure attached to a short-term bridge loan, a private lender, the kind of instrument a developer uses when their main financing starts to crack and they need cash fast without alerting their primary investors. Listed as supporting collateral was a joint investment account. Simone's eyes found the account number before Julian said a word. She knew that number. She had set up automatic transfers into that account every month for 14 months. The wedding fund, the account they had opened together in both their names for their future. He used it as collateral for the bridge loan, Julian said. He kept his voice flat and careful. There's no co-signature from you on the filing, just his. The kitchen was very quiet. He can't do that, Yolanda said. That's her money, too. It's legally murky, Julian said. Joint account. His name is on it. He's got arguable authority, but the lack of her signature is a problem for him, especially given the loan amount. He paused. Simone? She was still looking at the screen, at her account number, sitting inside a document she had never seen, attached to a loan she had never agreed to, used to prop up a project she had never been asked about. 14 months of transfers. Her money, her discipline, her quiet, steady contribution to a future that had apparently already been assigned to someone else. He needed you to stay stable, Yolanda said slowly. He needed you in place. That's why... She stopped. That's why the engagement continued, Simone said. Her voice was even. Even after whatever arrangement he'd made with Bree. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her cold coffee and took a sip, because her hands needed something to do. Keep digging, she said to Julian. Everything you can find. She turned to Yolanda. And I need you to find out everything you can about Bree Sinclair. Whatever your people know, whatever's been said. Yolanda was back by 2 o'clock. Simone heard her key in the door. Yolanda had a spare, had always had a spare, for exactly the kinds of days that required someone to come and go without ceremony. She came into the living room carrying the faint smell of restaurant air and something fried, and she sat down on the couch across from Simone without taking off her jacket. That was the first sign. When Yolanda kept her jacket on, it meant she hadn't decided yet how to say what she was about to say. Simone set down the legal pad she'd been writing on. Notes, mostly. Questions. A list of every financial document she could remember signing, or not signing, in the past 14 months. She had been trained to organize information before she had all of it. It kept her from spinning. "Talk to me," Simone said. Yolanda took a breath. "I had lunch with Camille." Simone knew Camille. Camille Okafor, an event planner who had worked 3 or 4 Wade family functions over the years. Camille was discreet with clients. She was significantly less discreet at lunch. She talked? Once I told her what happened at the party last night, she couldn't stop. Yolanda pulled her jacket off finally, folded it over the arm of the couch. She'd been sitting on this for months, Simone. Months. She said she felt sick about it. "How long?" Simone said. "Bree and Preston." Yolanda met her eyes. 8 months. The number landed like something solid and heavy. 8 months. Simone had gotten engaged 7 months ago. She did the math without trying to, because she was a person who always did the math, and the answer was exactly as ugly as she'd expected. It had already been happening. Before the ring, before the dinner where Preston had gotten down on one knee at the restaurant they'd gone to on their first date, while she had cried the way she hadn't cried in years, believing completely that the moment was real. It was already happening then. "Dolores?" Simone said. Yolanda nodded slowly. "She's known the whole time." Simone didn't move. "Camille coordinated 2 dinners in the last 6 months, Yolanda said. Private ones. The Wade house, not the club. Just the Wades, the Sinclairs, and Bree." She paused. Dolores hosted them. Requested them, actually. Camille said Dolores specifically asked that they be kept off the family's public calendar. There it was. Hidden dinners. Off the calendar. Preston's mother, who had smiled at Simone at every family event for 2 years, who had accepted her help planning 3 of those same family events, who had stood 6 feet away from her at last night's party with a champagne glass in her hand. That woman had been sitting across a dinner table from Bree Sinclair, accelerating something she had no intention of letting Simone know about. "She wasn't going to let it stay casual," Yolanda said quietly. "The Sinclair money. Their connections. Dolores has been trying to lock that in for over a year. And Preston let her engineer it. Preston benefited from it." Yolanda's voice was careful but blunt. Camille heard pieces, not everything, but enough. Gerald Sinclair's fund was the difference between the Harlow project surviving or not, and Bree had leverage. She knew the project was in trouble before the investors did. She knew Preston was hiding the payment defaults. Simone was very still. "So he bought her silence," Simone said. "He promised her equity." Yolanda said it plainly, the way she always delivered the worst things, without decoration, because decorating them didn't make them smaller. A formal stake in Wade development, once the project stabilized, in exchange for her staying quiet about the defaults and for keeping her father's investment in place. Simone looked at the legal pad on the coffee table. She thought about the account number she'd stared at that morning, her automatic transfers, 14 months of them, steady as a pulse, every single month. She thought about the bridge loan collateral document with her account number and his signature. She thought about the engagement dinner, the ring, the way he had looked at her across that restaurant table like she was the most important thing in the room. He had needed her calm. He had needed her in place, contributing, stable, unsuspecting. A foundation he could borrow against, literally and otherwise, while he waited to see whether Bree's father's money or her signature on his loan documents would save him first. The whole shape of it was visible now. Not just a betrayal, a structure, something that had been built carefully, piece by piece, with her as one of its load-bearing walls, without her knowledge, without her consent. She picked the legal pad back up. "I'm not doing anything yet," she said. Yolanda looked at her. "I need proof," Simone said. "Undeniable proof. The kind that doesn't leave room for a story." She tapped the pen against the pad once. "He's been very careful, so I'm going to be more careful." Preston came on a Tuesday. Simone was between meetings when her assistant knocked and leaned into the doorway with a look that said, "This is awkward, and I'm sorry." "There's a man in the lobby," she said. "He has flowers." Simone knew before she said his name. She smoothed the front of her blazer. "Send him up." She had 40 minutes before her next call. She used 90 seconds of them to straighten the files on her desk, move her coffee to the credenza, and settle into her chair with both feet flat on the floor. By the time Preston appeared in the doorway, she looked exactly the way she intended to look. Composed, unhurried, faintly busy. He looked worse than she expected. Not disheveled. Preston Wade was never fully disheveled. He had on a clean shirt, a gray blazer, the kind of shoes that got polished regularly, but there were shadows under his eyes that his good grooming couldn't cover, and the easy confidence he usually carried had been replaced by something careful and rehearsed, the way a man looks when he has practiced his expression in the mirror before leaving the house. He was carrying white peonies, a full bunch wrapped in brown paper, her favorite, and he knew it. "Hey," he said. "Preston." He came in, glanced around the office briefly, something she recognized as a reflex, that quick assessment he always did when he entered a room, and set the flowers on the edge of her desk. "I know you're at work. I won't take long." "Sit down," she said. He sat. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and looked at her with an expression she had once found sincere and now found very easy to read. It was his "I know I hurt you" face. She had seen it twice before, once after he missed her firm's partner event with a bad excuse, once after a comment at a dinner that had embarrassed her in front of his colleagues. Both times she had let him use it. Both times she had accepted whatever followed it. "I've been thinking about the other night," he started. "What I said. I know how it looked. I know how it felt. And I'm not going to pretend it wasn't a terrible thing to do." "Good," Simone said. He blinked. He had expected more, she could tell. An opening, a softening. She gave him neither. "I was under a lot of pressure that night," he continued. "Gerald had just finished telling me about a capital call issue that we've been managing, and I was—" He stopped, shook his head. "I panicked. I handled it badly, and it came out wrong. It wasn't about you." "Wasn't it?" she said, not quite a question. "Simone." His voice dropped. It got warmer, more private, the register he used when he wanted her to feel like they were the only two people in a conversation. "We've built something real. 2 years. I know I broke something the other night. I want to fix it. I want to fix us." She held his gaze and said nothing. He cleared his throat and reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He produced a folded envelope and set it on top of the peonies. There's something practical I need to ask you. The investment account, the joint one." He said it carefully, as if the word joint was a bridge he wasn't sure would hold his weight. "The structure needs to be adjusted. Given the current situation, it would be better for both of us if we formalized how the capital's positioned. I had the project's finance team draft a restructuring agreement. I just need you to review it and sign off." He was very calm when he said it, almost casual. Just need you to review it and sign off. As if she worked for him. As if she was still the same woman who had stood at that party in a dress she'd taken in herself, fielding vendor calls so his event would run smoothly, because that's what she did. She reached out and picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment without opening it. Then she set it down on her side of the desk. "I'll look these over," she said. "I don't sign anything without reviewing it properly. You know that." Something shifted in his eyes, the briefest flash of frustration, there and gone. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." "I'll be in touch," she said. He stood. He glanced at the flowers, then at her, and she could see him trying to decide whether the visit had gone well or badly. She didn't help him decide. She walked him to the office door, shook his hand once, professionally, and watched him step into the elevator. Then she went back to her desk and placed the envelope flat in the center of it. She did not open it yet. She had 2 more meetings and a client call to finish first. She finished all 3 without rushing. It was past 8 when the office cleared out. She had stayed deliberately. The building had gone quiet around her. The hum of the HVAC, the faint sound of a cleaning cart somewhere down the hall, the occasional elevator chime. She liked the office this way. Still, honest. A room full of nothing but what was actually there. She opened the envelope. The restructuring documents were 4 pages, clean formatting, professional presentation. Preston had used his project's outside firm, not a template. She read every line before she did anything else, the way she read everything, unhurried and precise. On the surface, the restructuring was straightforward. It recharacterized her contributions to the joint account as a formalized loan, protected her, technically, if the project failed. She could see the logic he'd used to make it look reasonable. She could also see the 2 things buried inside it that were not. The first, the restructuring would require her to subordinate her claim behind Gerald Sinclair's fund. Her money, her exposure, moved to the back of the line. The second, the document referenced a prior refinancing agreement, dated 11 months ago, one she had never seen. She pulled up her firm's verification software on her second monitor. She scanned the reference document number, cross-checked it against the account records, and requested a full authentication trace on the original filing. The result came back in 4 minutes. She stared at the screen. Her digital signature was on the refinancing document. Clean, formatted correctly, in exactly the right place. She had never signed it. She had not been in that meeting. She had not authorized any refinancing. She had never seen this document before tonight. Her signature, her specific digital certificate, the one tied to her professional credentials, was on a federal financing instrument she had never touched. She knew what she was looking at. She sat very still for a moment. Then she opened a fresh file, labeled it with today's date, and began to document. She called Julian at 7 in the morning. He answered on the second ring. "Come over," she said. "Bring everything you have." "Already packing my bag," he said, and hung up. Yolanda had stayed the night. She was at the kitchen counter when Simone came downstairs, already making coffee, moving quietly through the space the way she had since they were teenagers, like someone who understood that presence could be its own kind of comfort. She looked at Simone's face and didn't ask how she slept. She just handed her a mug. Julian arrived at 8:15 with his laptop, a legal pad, and a folder of printed documents thick enough to make a sound when he set it on the table. He had a dark gray shirt, no tie, and the expression he wore when something had already started moving in his head. He looked at Simone. "You found something." "I found everything," she said. They sat at the kitchen table, Simone at the head, Julian to her left, Yolanda to her right with her coffee and her phone face down in front of her. Simone opened the file she had built the night before and walked them through it. She did not rush. She did not editorialize. She laid it out in the order she had documented it. The joint account. The informal collateral Preston used without her knowledge or signature. The capital call crisis Julian had already identified in the public filings. Then the restructuring documents Preston had brought to her office, and the prior refinancing agreement buried inside them, the one dated 11 months ago, the one with her digital certificate on it, the one she had never signed. Julian went still when she got to that part. He leaned forward and read the authentication trace she had printed. He read it twice. "He forged your digital signature," Julian said. Yes. On a federal financing document. Yes. He sat back. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Simone, that's not misuse of a joint account. That is not a civil dispute. That is wire fraud. That is potentially a federal crime. I know, she said. I recognized it the moment the authentication came back. And he walked into your office yesterday and handed you the documents. Julian shook his head slowly. He had no idea you'd run a trace. No, she said. He didn't. Yolanda had been watching Simone carefully throughout. Now she set down her mug. So he's been running this whole thing. The affair, the deal with the Sinclairs, dangling that equity stake in front of Bree. And the whole time he needed your money and your name to hold it together. That's what the documents show, Simone said. And Bree's father, Julian said. Gerald Sinclair. His fund is in the project. He's been backing Preston based on representations about the financial structure, representations that include a refinancing document that was forged. He has no idea. Not yet, Simone said. The table went quiet for a moment. Julian was already writing on his legal pad. His handwriting was small and fast. The investor misrepresentation alone is significant. If Preston's been representing the project's financial position to Sinclair and other backers without disclosing that the collateral structure included an unauthorized use of personal funds, and if that forged refinancing document was part of what he used to make the numbers look clean, that's material misrepresentation to investors. That compounds the fraud exposure considerably. That's what I thought, Simone said. I wanted to hear you say it. He looked up at her. What are you planning? She told them. She spent the rest of the morning at her firm. She did not move quickly. Speed was not the point. Precision was the point. She submitted the authentication findings through her firm's official compliance intake. Proper documentation, proper chain of custody, nothing filed informally or out of sequence. She flagged the forged signature to her department head in a written memo, clean and factual, stripped of anything personal. She attached every supporting document in the order they would need to be reviewed. Her department head read it and looked up at her over his glasses. This is solid work, he said. Yes, she said. It is. By early afternoon, she drafted the meeting invitation. She wrote it carefully. The subject line read, Wade Development, Joint Account Restructuring, Final Review Meeting. The body was professional and brief, a standard closeout session, framing Bree's inclusion as routine given her documented role coordinating investor relations on the project. It was the kind of language that looked like nothing more than good process. She addressed it to Preston. She copied Dolores Wade. She copied Gerald Sinclair. She copied Bree. She read it over once, changed nothing, and sent it. Confirmations came back within the hour. All 4. She opened a fresh folder on her desktop and titled it Meeting, Final Review. Then she began pulling every document she would need: authentication records, account statements, the original filings, the forged refinancing agreement, Julian's legal notes cross-referenced against the public filings. She organized them in the order she would present them, methodical, unhurried, each page in its place. The meeting was confirmed for 2 days later. She had exactly 48 hours. She started preparing. The conference room at Wade Development smelled like fresh paint and money that hadn't arrived yet. Simone noticed it the moment she walked in. The walls were a deep charcoal gray. The furniture was expensive. A long oval table, black leather chairs, a credenza along one wall with a water pitcher and glasses arranged just so. A room designed to project success. She had been in rooms like this her entire career. She was not impressed. Preston was already seated at the head of the table when she entered, his jacket pressed, his posture loose in the way that meant he had told himself this was manageable. He smiled when he saw her, the wide, practiced smile he used with investors. "Simone," he said, "glad you could make it." "Of course," she said. Dolores sat to Preston's right in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, her back perfectly straight, her expression arranged into the careful pleasantness she wore for professional settings. She gave Simone a small nod. Nothing warm, nothing rude, just the minimum. Gerald Sinclair sat across from Dolores. He was a broad man in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the settled confidence of someone who had made his money early and spent the years since deciding who deserved access to it. He had a legal pad in front of him and a pen in his hand. Bree sat beside her father. She was dressed well, a navy blazer, hair pulled back, the picture of a competent project coordinator preparing for a routine professional meeting. But her eyes moved to Simone and held there for just a second too long before she looked away. Julian entered behind Simone and set his bag on the table. Preston's smile flickered. "Julian, I didn't realize—" "He's here in a professional capacity," Simone said, "as my attorney." The word attorney landed in the room like something heavy being set down on the floor. Gerald Sinclair's pen stopped moving. Dolores's chin lifted slightly. Preston recovered quickly. "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable." He gestured toward the chairs. "Let's get started." Simone sat. Julian sat beside her. She opened her folder. She started with the joint account. She didn't frame it as an accusation. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the account statements on the table, printed clean, labeled by date, and walked through the deposits, the balance history, and the point at which the funds had been listed as informal collateral on the Wade Development capital structure. "The account was opened jointly," she said, "with contributions from both parties. The use of those funds as project collateral required both signatures. There is only one signature on record." Preston shifted in his chair. "That was a temporary measure, a bridge. I was going to explain—" "I'm not finished," Simone said. She said it quietly. He stopped. Gerald Sinclair leaned forward and picked up one of the statements. He studied it. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened. Then Simone placed the second document on the table. "This is the refinancing agreement dated 11 months ago," she said. "It was submitted as part of the capital restructuring. It carries my digital signature as a co-signatory on the underlying collateral account." She slid a second page beside it, the authentication trace. Time-stamped, flagged. "I did not sign this document," she said. "The authentication trace confirms the digital certificate was applied without my authorization. I identified this 2 days ago using my firm's verification software, and I have since submitted the findings through our official compliance intake." The room was very quiet. She looked at Gerald Sinclair directly. "Your investment in this project was made, in part, based on representations about the financial structure, representations that included this refinancing document as part of the collateral record. You were not told the account was used without the co-owner's knowledge. You were not told the signature on this document was not obtained through proper authorization." Gerald Sinclair set the statement down slowly. He looked at Preston. Preston opened his mouth. He closed it. "Preston?" Gerald's voice was low and even. "What is this?" This is being taken out of context. Simone, we talked about restructuring. You agreed to look at—" "I agreed to review the documents you brought to my office," Simone said. "I reviewed them. This is what I found." Dolores had been silent through all of it. Her hands were folded on the table, and her face had held its careful composure, the way a mask holds until the pressure behind it becomes too much. Now the mask slipped. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of crack that shows first in the eyes, a sudden, unguarded flash of panic she couldn't get back in front of before everyone in the room saw it. She looked at Preston. Then she looked at Gerald Sinclair. Then she looked back at the documents on the table, and her expression was no longer composed. It was cornered. Simone turned to Bree last. She kept her voice even. "You've been coordinating investor relations on this project for 8 months," she said. "You were familiar with the capital structure. You were familiar with the account." She paused. "You were also aware, for those same 8 months, that Preston and I were engaged. Bree said nothing. Your father's capital was at risk that entire time, Simone said, and you said nothing to him. The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald Sinclair turned to look at his daughter. Bree did not look back at him. The hallway outside the conference room was narrow and white, lit by overhead panels that made everything look a little colder than it was. Gerald Sinclair walked out first. He didn't say a word in the room after Simone finished. He simply gathered the documents she had placed in front of him, picked them up carefully, like they were evidence, because they were, and he stood and he walked out. His legal pad stayed behind on the table, the pen resting across it, unused. Bree followed him into the hallway. The door closed behind her. Her father was already standing with his back to the conference room, facing the far wall. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't gesturing. He was still, in the particular way of a man who was working very hard to control what he was feeling. Dad, don't. He didn't turn around. Give me a moment. Bree stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the hallway, her navy blazer still pressed, her hair still neat, and she looked like exactly what she was, someone whose performance had run out of room. When Gerald turned around, his face was composed again. That was almost worse. You knew about the account, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't know about the signature. I didn't know he had, but you knew the account existed. You knew she hadn't signed off on the collateral structure. He looked at her steadily. You coordinated investor relations on this project for 8 months, Bree. You prepared the quarterly summaries I reviewed. You knew what was in those filings and what wasn't. Bree opened her mouth. He held up one hand, just one, flat and final. My money was in this project, he said. My name is attached to this project. And you, my daughter, who I brought into this because I trusted your judgment, you sat next to that woman's fiancé for 8 months and said nothing. His voice didn't rise. It stayed level and deliberate, which made every word land harder. Not to me, not to her, not to anyone. Preston told me it would be resolved before the project closed. He said, I don't care what Preston said. Gerald picked up the documents again, tapped them once against his palm. I care what you said, which was nothing. The silence in the hallway was different from the silence in the conference room. That one had been stunned. This one was final. The equity stake, Bree started, is gone, her father said. The project is gone. And whatever you thought you were building here, he paused, looking at her with an expression that was more tired than angry. This is not how I raised you to build anything. He walked toward the elevator without looking back. Bree stood alone in the hallway. Inside the conference room, Dolores had not moved. She was still in her chair when Preston started trying to explain, his voice low and urgent, cycling through justifications she'd heard before in different shapes. Temporary bridge, poor communication. Simone knew more than she was letting on. The project was still viable with the right support. Dolores watched him talk. Julian had stepped out. The room was just the two of them, and the documents still spread across the table. She thought about the dinner she had hosted 6 months ago, the one she'd framed as a casual family gathering while making sure the Sinclair sat beside Preston all evening. She thought about the phone calls with Miriam Sinclair afterward, the careful way she'd kept the possibility alive, the patience she'd practiced for years to get the family standing to where she wanted it. She thought about the faces of the people in that room when Simone placed the second document on the table. Mother, Preston said, are you listening to me? Dolores stood up. She picked up her handbag. She straightened her blazer. I will not be at your next meeting, she said. Whatever that meeting is, and whoever you've invited to it. Preston stared at her. What? I will also not be attending anything connected to the Sinclair family going forward. She said it with the same measured tone she used when she was managing a seating chart. Precise. Already decided. I will tell Miriam Sinclair that personally. Today. You can't just— I arrange things I shouldn't have arranged, she said. I will not compound that by staying attached to the consequences publicly. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment something crossed her face that wasn't anger and wasn't coldness. It was something closer to grief, though she didn't let it stay. Fix what you broke, Preston. Don't ask me to stand next to it. She walked out. Simone was waiting for the elevator at the end of the hall when she heard Preston's footsteps behind her. Simone. He came around to face her, positioning himself between her and the elevator doors. His jacket was still pressed. His face was the face he used when he was about to say something he'd already rehearsed. Before you go, please, just 1 minute. She didn't step back. She simply looked at him. We had something real, he said. You know that. Whatever went wrong, whatever happened with the project, what we built together was real. I made mistakes, I know that. But I need you to— You need me to sign the restructuring documents, Simone said. He paused. Then, I need you to remember that we loved each other. The elevator arrived. The doors opened behind him. Simone didn't move toward them yet. I remember everything clearly, she said. That's actually the problem for you. She held his gaze. I remember the investment account you used without my signature. I remember the refinancing document you signed my name to. I remember standing next to you in front of 150 people while you told me to leave. She tilted her head slightly. You thought I would absorb all of that the same way I absorbed everything else. The comments your mother made, the meetings I ran that you took credit for, the vendors I confirmed while you were at the bar. She kept her voice even and unhurried. You looked at everything I did quietly, and you decided it meant I wouldn't look closely enough to notice what you were doing. Preston said nothing. That was the only real mistake you made, she said. Not the account, not the signature. You made those because you believed I wouldn't catch them. She stepped toward the elevator. I catch everything. I always have. She stepped around him and into the elevator. I won't be signing anything, she said. Not today, not ever. The doors closed. 6 months felt like a different life. Simone's firm had 4 clients, 1 signed retainer agreement, and a name she had chosen herself, Clarity Forensics, LLC. Simple. Exact. Hers. The office was small, 2 rooms on the 4th floor of a building in Midtown, with wide windows and afternoon light that came in clean and stayed late. She had picked it herself, signed the lease herself, paid the deposit from money that had never touched anything connected to Preston Wade. Tonight wasn't about the office, though. Tonight was dinner at Marcello's, a restaurant on the north end of downtown with low lighting and white tablecloths, and a noise level that meant the table beside yours couldn't hear a word you said. The kind of place Simone used to pass on her way to events she was attending on Preston's schedule. She had made the reservation herself. Julian was already at the table when she arrived, his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, reading something on his phone that he put away the second he saw her. He stood. There she is, he said. You're early, Simone said. You knew I'd be early. Yolanda arrived 4 minutes later, dropping into her chair with the energy of someone who had been running since morning and was choosing, deliberately, to stop. She set her bag on the empty chair beside her and looked at both of them. Okay, she said. Who's ordering the expensive thing? Because I've been waiting for this dinner for 3 weeks and I'm not holding back. Order whatever you want, Simone said. This one's on the firm. Yolanda pointed at her. That is the first time you've ever said those words, and I need a moment. Julian laughed. It was the kind of sound that loosened a room. The waiter came. They ordered. Julian raised his water glass first. He was driving, and Yolanda followed with a full pour of the Bordeaux she had selected, with more deliberateness than most people applied to major decisions. To Clarity Forensics, Julian said, and its first major client win. To the woman who built it, Yolanda said, looking at Simone directly. Simone lifted her glass. She thought about what she might have said 6 months ago at this same table, if someone had told her this was where she'd land. She probably wouldn't have believed it. Not because she doubted herself exactly, but because she had been so deep inside a version of her life that was built around someone else's priorities that she had forgotten what it felt like to move at her own speed, toward her own goals, with her own name on the door. She believed it now. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you." They ate. They talked about the client, a woman who had brought Simone a partnership agreement riddled with liability she hadn't caught until the ink was almost dry. They talked about Julian's newest real estate case, and about Yolanda's ideas for 2 more service offerings she thought the firm should develop. They argued about the bread. They laughed about the bread. It was easy. It was real. It was hers. She noticed him first because of the jacket. It was the navy one Preston wore when he was trying to look like he hadn't lost anything. She recognized it from the back, the way he squared his shoulders when he walked into a room, the practiced ease that he had perfected so long ago it had become his only gear. He was crossing the restaurant with a man Simone didn't recognize, headed toward a table near the back. Not their usual section. Preston had always preferred to be seen near the front, near the bar, near the entrance where people could clock his arrival. The table he was being led to now was quieter, smaller, set against the back wall. She had heard through Julian, casually and without seeking it, that Preston was consulting for a mid-sized development firm across town. Not leading projects, not heading a division. Consulting. Brought in for pieces, not the whole. She watched him sit down. He didn't see her. She looked away. It was a few minutes later, when Yolanda went to find the restroom, that Simone's gaze moved toward the bar. And there was Bree. She was with a small group, 3 or 4 people, dressed neatly but without the polish she'd had at the engagement party. No one at the bar was leaning toward her the way Preston's investors once had. She wasn't holding the room. She was part of it, which was a different thing entirely. Simone had heard that one too. Entry-level coordinator at a design firm. No title beyond that, no stake in anything. Bree looked up once, briefly, in the general direction of the dining room. Her eyes didn't land anywhere. Simone felt nothing sharp. No satisfaction, no cold pleasure, just a quiet recognition, like reading the last line of a document that had already been filed. She picked up her glass. Yolanda came back to the table. Julian was mid-sentence about something that made Yolanda immediately start arguing with him before she even sat down, and Simone laughed, genuinely, fully, and turned back to face the 2 people who had helped her build something worth sitting inside of. The restaurant hummed around her, warm and bright. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!